What was that one memorable moment that you've shared with a complete stranger? Story 1. I was going home really late one night around 3 a.m. and I noticed this girl sitting in the street who obviously looked like she had cried recently, so I asked her if she was okay. She said yes, and I asked her if she wanted me to stay with her, and she didn't answer, so I sat next to her. She didn't do or say anything for about a minute, and neither did I, but then out of nowhere she hugged me, so I hugged her back and we stayed like this a few minutes, not saying anything. At some point a car stopped and a woman who was obviously her friend came out and took over from me, thanking me for staying with her. To this day, I still have no idea what upset this girl so much. Story 2. I once started chatting with a woman next to me on the plane. She took some edibles and we spent the next 6 hours of the flight coming up with a business plan for a food truck where everything it served was ball-shaped. Story 3. Flying up I-65 between Nashville and Louisville, this random guy in pickup truck and I were leapfrogging our way up the interstate. I was in front and came flying up on the end of a state trooper. Cop did nothing but keep cruising at 75 miles per hour. Realizing what was happening, I flipped my signal and moved back in the right lane. Truck guy comes flying past me as I slowly creep back from the cop like I never sped in my life. Truck guy realizes there's a cop and flicks his signal and gets in the right lane. I needed gas, so I decided to get off the interstate and let the cop go off to wherever he was going. I'm also hungry, so I figure I'll get Wendy's first, then gas. As I pull into Wendy's, I notice truck guy is right behind me. We walk into an restaurant and he turns to me, he says, "Man, we were really setting the pace till that cop showed up." We laughed and talked a bit in line before we parted ways and got back on the highway. Story 4. I noticed this girl at a bus station had a Green Day shirt on and she was attractive, so I was looking at her. She was on the other side of the station. She noticed me but didn't really do anything. Finally a guy walks over and they both walk together toward where I am to get on a bus. Before she got on the bus she turned around, smiled, and waved at me. Never saw her again and never will, but I'll always remember that. Story 5. Pulled a 3-year-old and his unconscious mom out of a burning car when I was 16. Unconscious people are heavy AF and I was convinced I was handling a dead body. I am invited to the kiddos' elementary graduation this May though. Story 6. One day in 5th grade I got really sick and was taken to the ER. Once there, I sat next to a woman who was in labor and having contractions. She caught me looking at her, so she gently took my hand and placed it on her belly, letting me feel the baby kick. That was the first time I ever felt a baby kick in a woman's belly. The kid's probably in their mid-teens now. Hope you're happy, kiddo. Story 7. Back when weed was illegal, I was smoking a joint downtown Toronto. This super old lady walked up to me and asked, "Is that marijuana?" I replied, "Why, absolutely it is." She then compliments my joint. "It's so straight." I thought it was a cigarette, but I could smell something funny. I laugh and offer her some. "You want some?" She looked left and right. I was laughing so much already, and then she says, "Okay, let me give it a puff." She hit it 3 times like a champ. She thanked me and went on with her day. Looked like a normal granny to me, but she knows an opportunity when she smells one. I imagine she's dead now as she looked in her 80s at the time. This was 11 years ago. May she rest in peace. Story 8. I was on a commuter train when a young woman seated in front of me suddenly let out a scream and started sobbing. People around her assumed the stony-faced commuter mask, but she was so distraught that I got up and sat beside her. She had just received a text that a good friend had committed suicide. I put my arms around her and she sobbed against my shoulder and talked about her friend for the duration of the ride, about 15 minutes. I got off at her stop and walked her to her mother, who was waiting in a car at the pickup curb. I then caught the next train to my stop down the line. Story 9. I was a witness to a car versus motorbike crash, and had to hang around for the police. Another girl was a witness too, so we were there, talking to the biker who was a little hurt but mainly pissed off. The police came, and the girl said she was freezing cold, so the police officer gave her his coat. She was about 5, he was well over 6, she looked ridiculous in his coat. We had a real laugh about it, gave our statements and were released from the accident site. This was a good few years ago, but I still smile at the memory of her wearing that coat. Story 10 years ago. I was driving home from work at dusk in peak hour traffic. ID just left the city and noticed, oddly, that other cars around me were giving me a wide berth. No cutting in front or anything. It wasn't until I got to the bridge that connects the city with the suburbs that I noticed a beat-up old clunker in my mirror dodging through the traffic. Once I got to the middle of the bridge he kept pace beside me, his passenger trying to get my attention. In certain parts of Australia you don't make eye contact with drivers who seem to be acting weird beside you. You ignore them. Still, I looked over and the passenger was pointing to the front of my car. Being on dark, I hadn't noticed the smoke pouring out from under the bonnet. No wonder people had been avoiding me like the plague. Still, only one person car in all the city traffic bothered to tell me. He told me later he saw me before I left the city and was jumping lanes trying to get to me the whole time. Difficult in that sort of traffic. I waved to thank the driver and he nodded, then zipped in front of me and put his hazard lights on. I did the same. He escorted me to the nearest petrol station, some 5 kilometers away. We parked, I popped the bonnet and he immediately told me the issue. My dad fixed it the next day. The guys in the other car were from an undesirable suburb, but they were the only ones who helped. Nowadays I don't judge people by the way they look, the car they drive, or where they live. Edit paragraphs are helpful. Story 11. Standing in an hour-long line for a roller coaster. I have ridiculous anxiety. I don't fear the ride. I fear the ride malfunctioning. I was so scared, but my kids really wanted me to ride it with them. All the people around me in line were so supportive. answering my questions and giving me pep talks. Every cell in my body said bolt bolt bolt, get out, you're gonna die, as they strapped me in my seat. The ride was amazing. Afterwards, all those strangers who had seen my deep and real fear were proud of me and high-fiving me and congratulating me as though I'd just wrestled a mountain lion. It meant so much. Another one after a best friend lost a baby. A couple of us decided to take her to see one of her favorite artists, Florence the Machine, a few months later. Toward the end of the show, my best friend wanted to get up close. I grabbed her hand and pardon USD and excuse met our way to the front row, and the crowd just parted for us. We watched the last few songs from the front, and it was her happiest since the tragedy. As the show ended, she started saying, I'm so happy right now, and we started hugging all the people around us. Those strangers hugged us as though they knew exactly what we were there for, what we were experiencing, and one guy put his hand on his heart and said, bless your hearts. I've had many more, but these are two favorites that meant so much. Edit, thanks for all your responses. I haven't participated much in Reddit, and this is the first time I've had this much communication and responses. Everybody was so positive, and it really made my day hearing your stories as well. Thanks guys. Story 12. When I snuck into a wedding and danced with this older girl at age 18. I've talked about it before, so here is excerpt from the original post. I crashed a wedding when I was 18 because it was on my bucket list, and ended up dancing with a woman who was maybe 24-25. Her name was Natalie. We danced for a couple songs, then the DJ put on a slow song, and I was thinking in my head that's my cue to leave, but I have this habit of when I think I shouldn't do something because of negative thought, I just say it and do it, so I grabbed her hand and we slow danced. I didn't know anything about this woman beyond her name, and here I was slow dancing. After that I bounced because people were starting to look at me funny suspiciously, so I left without saying goodbye. Honestly, I look back and think I wonder what Natalie is doing. This was in October of 2013, and honestly that was the first time I said it and did what my heart wanted instead of my head. Life has been better ever since. Story 13. About 15 or so years ago, I was wandering a museum in Seattle. As you do in museums, you tend to run into the same families and groups as you tour around. I happened to notice a grizzled man and his family taking a double take at me every time would happen upon each other. He finally walked up to me and apologized for staring. He said he'd noticed me and thought he was in a time machine. Why's that? I asked. Well, you remind me a lot of a guy I was in the Navy with. I looked at him and said, was it in Memphis? Yes. Was it in 1950s? Yes. Was his name Jack? Dude about passed out. That's when I realized I was a carbon copy of my dad. Edit, sorry to not finish the full story. Turns out it was a guy Dad spent time with in the Navy. They ran around in the 50s traveling to see shows at the Ryman and other back alley jam sessions all over the state. Hey, race a pic of me and Dad about 6 months before he passed so y'all can see a bit of resemblance. Story 14. I was carrying groceries in my arms and saw the paper towels were slipping out of the bag. I tilted to let it fall, hit it back up with my knee towards my arm and caught it under my arm between my elbow and ribs on the side. I felt bad. A lovely older woman across the street saw this and cheered. Nice move. She was genuinely cheering, arms up and everything. Another was a kid. My husband was wearing a t-shirt with an old Batman logo on it and held the door for a father and son. The father looks to the son and says, what do say? Assuming the prompted answer was thank you, he looks up at my husband and declares Batman. Story 15. I was working a shift at the hotel I work at, and was getting breakup-y vibe text messages from my now ex-boyfriend. Yes. The day he literally moved out all of his stuff and sent one text and erased me on everything over a really dumb fight. Totally toddlerish, but whatever, and I just sort of silently cried the whole shift. A guest came up to me to check out of his room, much older than me, probably about 65. He noticed the tears in my eyes, and asked me what was wrong. I explained vaguely that it was just a dumb boy who may or may not move out of my house today. He was super understanding, and he told me his granddaughter has gone through something similar. He consoled my feelings and told me everything was gonna be alright, and that it's for the best. This happened like 2 days ago, and you know it just made me feel a bit better. Story 16. I met some random, over Tinder, and agreed to meet up with him during a trip overseas. I landed in his country, and when I reached my accommodation, I messaged him to let him know I was ready for him to come over. 40 minutes later, he messages me to tell me that he's downstairs. I was staying in a guest house, and I leave my room to meet him in the entry, only to find that he's already climbing the stairs to my room. Both of us sort of freeze in the stairway. As our eyes meet, it was almost like we knew each other and we were reuniting after decades apart. Something passed between us, and to this day, I couldn't even begin to explain what it was. We've been together for nearly a year now. Story 17. I was crossing a street in a crowd of people by Union Square in NYC. He was crossing the other way. We caught each other's eye at the same time and held the gaze for the whole walk, both turning around and walking backwards so we could keep looking. When we got to the other side, we both stopped. I mouthed hi, he waved and smiled. Cars stared blocking us, so we both just turned around and walked away. I've thought about that for years. Everything seemed so choreographed. Story 18. I used to work at Starbucks, and there was a regular customer who always got a grande extra hot chai tea latte. She was a 7th grade teacher and always told us funny things her students did. I was 19 and depressed, anxious, abused, and suicidal. Every single day would be me planning when I was going to kill myself. My parents lived 10 hours away in another city and never checked in on me, and I had next to no friends. One day I made her chai as usual, and she said, "This is super good. Great job, I'm proud of you." No one had told me they were proud of me in so long. I went home and cried. It was the tiny bit of hope I needed that no one else in my life could give me. I wrote her a note on some receipt paper about how much that meant to me, and the next day she came and I gave it to her. A few days later she saw me and told me that she had seen the principal of her school a week or so back because she was anxious that she wasn't doing a good job as a teacher. She had a lot of problems with kids this year, and she was wondering what she was doing wrong. After getting my note, she had the reassurance she needed to know that some years are better than others, but she is still making a wonderful difference in people's lives. So I guess she reassured me when I needed it, and I reassured her when she needed it. Story 19. I was on a plane ride, and just as we're landing, the plane suddenly angles up at 45 degrees. It was pretty shaky and really threw the passengers around and made some people visibly confused, anxious. The most memorable thing was this Hispanic grandma next to me. She looked at me as this was happening, and simultaneously, we both shrugged and raised our eyebrows like, "Welp, this is it, we're done." It was a weird experience to briefly just accept our fate together as total strangers. Well, it turned out there was a tire on the runway that they didn't see until we were about to land. After the pilot told us that, the lady and I just laughed about it together, and we didn't even question that both of us were totally prepared for death. Just said to have a nice day to each other and moved on. Story 20. A random 7-year-old kid walking with his mother holding up a hand to me and saying high five as we passed each other one street, which I promptly obliged without breaking stride. It was such a surreal moment, but it put a smile on my face for the rest of the day. Story 21. I remember joining a Discord server that has thousands of members, but very few of them went into voice channels. It was me and a bunch of other guys chilling. Then I decided to whip out the "You're a Wizard" Harry script from that one Gmod parody. A random guy I have never spoken to before decided to join in. We read the script and started yelling at each other while everyone else died laughing. One of the best moments ever. Story 22. My wife and I were driving to spend New Year's Eve in a cabin in the Smokies with my family last year. It was snowing, but we managed to get probably a half mile from the cabin before running into a stuck car blocking the path forward. Due to some misunderstandings, we thought we were further away than we were and turned around to go get food and figure out if we'd just drive back home or get a hotel for the night. While we're waiting for a table, my wife starts playing with this couple's little girl. Eventually that leads to talking to the parents, with whom we share our story of the night. In a wild turn of fate, they have 2 different hotel rooms in the area in different hotels and are only using one, so they offered to let us complete strangers stay in the other one free of charge. We followed them to the place. They showed us the room and gave us the key, and we made triple sure the deadbolt was sufficient to keep them out in case they wanted to come kill us later. They didn't, and we had a very nice night in a very nice free hotel room with a full kitchen, living room, and jacuzzi tub that we definitely had in. Edit I forgot, but we did manage to buy their food at the restaurant as a thank you. Still way less than a hotel room. Story 23. I was sitting in the car waiting to pick up my boyfriend when he got done donating blood. I was watching this dude outside chilling and waiting for someone, too I assumed. The place was surrounded by this garden that had all these little rocks everywhere, and he started juggling them. So of course I'm like yeah, so he stops and I scream juggle the rocks again. Now I'm like 20 feet away in my car, so this must have sounded like a disembodied voice, but he did it and it was awesome and I think about it all the time. Story 24. I was in the grocery store when I heard a young child pitching a fit. The kid was screaming, crying, the whole kit and caboodle, while this old man who was in the same aisle as me paused to look in the direction of the crying child. He then looks at me and says I feel the same way and goes back to his shopping. Story 25. This is a recent moment I can think of. It was my last day in Tokyo and I had booked a night bus ride to Osaka that would happen after midnight. After eating dinner I decided to find an internet cafe to rest at. I was pretty sick and found one near Shinjuku Station, where the highway buses make stops at. I went in the internet cafe, booked a cubicle for a few hours in the ladies section, then laid down on the mat floor and tried to sleep. After a couple of hours I heard a woman shouting super loudly which woke me up. I tried to listen and she was arguing with an employee working at the front desk about not getting points or something. I could hear him calmly trying to talk her down, but she continued screaming at him. I have no idea why, but I decided to poke my head out the door, and shortly after I did that, the door to the cubicle next to mine opened and a girl around my age stuck her head out too. We both looked at each other as we heard the woman in the lobby continue screaming and we started giggling. The girl whispered to me in Japanese, "So scary," and I nodded in response and we both giggled again, trying to muffle our laughter with our hands, and then we returned to our booths. The Yendi. Hey race a dumb screenshot of me writing out this moment to some friends when it happened. Story 26. I ran the last mile and a half of my first half marathon with a random girl. We chatted the whole time because we both were struggling. It was really cool to cross the finish line right next to her. I'm married, so it wasn't a romantic thing or anything like that, just 2 humans that needed some encouragement to finish a run. Never even got her name. Story 27. On my way home from work I was stopped at an intersection, which is the best time to go into full-on sing-out mode, of course, so I'm really into it, putting all of my leftover energy into this song. A brown Jeep crosses through the intersection in front of me in what feels like slow motion, and the passenger turns his head to witness my show. I lock eyes with him and keep on going, not even sure if he can see through my tinted windows. But then he breaks out into the widest grin and starts laughing, and then I start laughing, and then we're both laughing and sharing each other's joy in this moment. It was only a few seconds, but it felt like we had true companionship with each other. I don't think I'll ever forget it. Story 28. I performed at this specific bar a couple times in the evening, played guitar and sang. Everyone, and especially me, were having a good time and nothing extraordinary happened. A couple days later I'm down at the beach, like 5 to 6 minutes drive from said bar, when this guy approaches me, asking if it was me singing at that bar the other night. I said yes, and he told me he really liked it and gave me a thumbs up. That seriously made my day. Story 29. I think it was about 2008, and I went to see a Vin Diesel movie. Some Google Foo reveals it was probably Babylon A.D. alone, in an almost empty theater. I had just broken up with my then fiancée and I was mostly trying to waste time. But even by that standard the movie was god-awful. It didn't matter to me because I just didn't want to be at home amongst my things and my memories and my pain. But even through all of that I was bewildered at how nonsensical this movie was. So as I walk out of the theater, it turns out that there was one other person in there, and while I was mulling how confused I was about the movie and how much I was dreading going home, this other guy calmly walks up behind me and says, "Hey, did you have any idea what that movie was about?" And I said nope, and he said thank God, I thought it was just me and maybe I was stupid. Anyway, I'm gonna go drown my regret in a beer if you want one. And I don't know why I said yes. There are very few situations where I'd normally agree to extra socializing of any kind, much less with a total stranger, but I did, and it was the first moment I remember that felt like everything was going to be okay. I was going to survive this breakup. I got to chat about nothing in particular with no one in particular, and I could finally take my first gasp of breathable air after weeks of drowning in an ocean of misery. He'll never know if he could tell I was in pain, or if it was just an incredibly lucky coincidence, but it was tremendously important to me all the same, and I'm eternally grateful. So, Alex, wherever you are, thanks man, I owe you. That was a really good beer. Story 30. On my way to work I had to change highways. This one merged 2 lanes into one, and it was super common for people to get hyper-aggressive, try to cut instead of taking turns, and using the shoulder to drive ahead of people. So it's another morning rush hour and I'm getting near the stopping point when someone blazes up on the shoulder. Welp, I notice him soon enough that I can angle my car to the point that it'd be risky to his paint job to try and keep going. After I straighten out, he tries to go around the other side, but the car in front of me has positioned themselves as a block. We proceed to practically sink our progress to prevent this guy from slipping ahead. Never saw the face of my partner in traffic, but it was a pure moment. Story 31. Walking through Ruby Falls Cave singing Afternoon Delight when a guy from an oncoming group joins me in song, including the clap clap, and we sang until we couldn't hear each other anymore as we went our separate ways. Story 32. I was working at a natural food co-op in Northern California when I was in college, restocking the bread aisle. This was one of those places where the customers were primarily from the hippie community, for lack of a better word. I remember a woman standing behind me, asking me some question in a soft voice about the loaf of bread in her hand. I turned to look at her to ask her to repeat her question, and then we just kind of stared into each other's eyes for a second. Not out of attraction, but I guess out of a moment of some kind of connection I couldn't explain. Then she put her arms around me and gave me a big warm hug, and whispered brother. Then we smiled at each other and she went on shopping. That totally made my day. Story 33. The time me and this one guy helped a family who were involved in a hit and run get out of their car and then directed traffic until the police showed up. Story 34. I was stuck at the airport after several long delays and the thought of missing my sister's big day looming. I started crying and trying to cover how upset I was when this guy across the bench asked to sit next to me and proceeded to give me a tissue and show me his Tibetan singing bowls. He let me try them and told me more about each one. I couldn't stop imaging how insane we looked in an airport, making incredible and weird chanting sounds from the bowls, but it truly calmed me down and I never got his name or where we was flying to, but it's a cherished memory with a stranger that I really appreciated in my time of needing a friend. Story 35. A 4-hour class that was part interview, part testing for a job. She and I hit it off and made the class fun for each other. We talked about working together and basically became good friends. This was way before cell phones. I got hired and she didn't, never saw her again. Story 36. This happened before I could remember it, but my parents tell me the story all the time when we passed the spot it happened. When I was just getting good at walking, I was a few steps ahead of my parents, chest puffed out, walking like I was the king of the world. According to my parents, this tall black man walking the opposite direction of me looked me up and down and said, "Walk tall little man, walk tall." I love when my parents tell me that story because I always picture little me being told to walk tall by a guy who looks like Samuel L. Jackson or James Earl Jones. Story 37. On the high pass west of Death Valley, an F-18 buzzed my motorcycle so low I could have hit it with a rock. It was tremendously loud. After it passed, the jet wheeled high overhead, and I slammed on the brakes and started fishing for my camera like a good tourist. As the plane disappeared over the far side of the pass, I lost my balance and tipped the bike. My motorcycle was heavily loaded with camping gear, and I could not lift it alone, so I started removing pieces of luggage when an RV pulled up beside me on the highway. The driver rolled down the window and shouted at me, "Did the wash from that jet knock you over?" I told him in a manner of speaking, "Yes, could you give me a hand here?" So Mr. RV got out and helped me right the bike, and we talked about how that was the damnedest thing we'd ever seen. I was in Naha, Okinawa and came alongside a tiny, elderly Japanese couple waiting for the pedestrian crossing light to change. I'm 66, they were under 5 tall. They looked up at me and I looked down at them and all three of us simultaneously broke into laughter at the difference. the light changed and we crossed. I turned right, they went straight, and we waved goodbye workout without having spoken a word. Story 38. 2 years ago, I had a chance to visit a real touristy island popular with foreign tourists. First time being far away from home, first time seeing the world, was my first plane ride as well, so there I was wide-eyed, kayaking in a beautiful lagoon along with several other tourists. Started taking pics of my surroundings with my phone, from the turquoise waters up to the cliffs. As I was panning down there was this lovely lady directly in front of me on a kayak smiling at me. She was on a ready-shoot pose. I'm an extremely shy person and my usual defense mechanism is to look aloof in front of strangers. Took a pic of her, looked away and pretended not seeing her. I felt extremely horrible. She was all smiles in that pic and I acted like a, still can't get over it till now. Sorry kike lady edit, yes I still have the pic, here she is. Story 39. I was on a 2-hour train ride to go meet some friends for a weekend of hanging out. I was by myself, and the train had a lot of passengers so there wasn't a great selection of seats. I decided to sit across the table from this very pretty lady. We were kind of just minding our own business as more and more people got off the train. I was looking out the window, and she was reading a book. She happened to glance up at me just as I was feeling a yawn coming on. I sometimes try to hide my yawns when in public. She giggled when she saw my very poor attempt to try to keep my mouth closed and then said feeling tired. I smiled, said yeah, and what followed was a very lengthy conversation between us. We had a good laugh, got to know each other and just had an overall pleasant talk. We both got off at the same stop but went opposite directions once we got off the platform after saying a quick goodbye. I found this moment particularly memorable because it was probably the closest I got to feeling like I was in some kind of rom-com. My only regret for this was probably that we never actually introduced ourselves to each other. No names, no numbers, no nothing. Had I had the courage to ask, maybe a big part of my life would be different now, not even strictly romantically. She could have ended up being a very good friend. That was years ago though, and am now happy and content with my life. Wherever you are, stranger, I hope you've been having a good life and got that master's degree in psychology you were studying for. Story 40. I used to get compared to Ed Sheeran in my appearance. Was leaving a Def Leppard Whitesnake concert when I saw a guy who looked super similar to Ed Sheeran. We locked eyes and knew without speaking, and then excitedly bonded over our experiences. We were a two-man doppelgang. Story 41. I had just dislocated my kneecap in Puglia, Italy. My boyfriend and I were in a beautiful town, walking around looking for wine, when my knee pain flared up. I was clearly in pain, grimace on my face, clutching my knee brace on, as we passed a little bar on the street we were on. Man outside of the bar sitting on a plastic white chair saw me, made eye contact, didn't say a word, just stood up from his chair, gestured for me to sit down, ran inside the bar, yelled at the owner, and he came out with a bag of ice for me. I said grazie. He just tipped his head down at me and walked away. He didn't know me, he didn't speak to me, and I'm sure he has no idea, but that one act of kindness will stay with me for my entire life. My knee felt better. We bought the most delicious bottle of wine I have ever had, and Puglia will forever be in my heart. Story 42. 3 years ago I was out for Halloween, dressed up as Harley Quinn from the comics. My friend and I were walking down the street when suddenly this very attractive guy dressed as the Joker walking the opposite way stops in front of us, throws open his arms, and says baby to me. I immediately ran into his arms and said hi Puddin. He spun me around in the air, we grinned at each other, and then my friend and I went on our way. Fun moment. Story 43. I was backpacking in New Zealand and wanted to go to a DNB festival out west of Auckland. I was alone and just jumped on a train to head in the general direction. Got off at the last stop and there wasn't any shops that sold alcohol. I asked this older lady if she knew of anywhere. She drove me 2 towns back to get booze, then asked me where I was headed. Instead of dropping me off at the train station, she took me all the way to the festival and gave me a couple dollars for the tractor ride down with my bags. Easily 2 hours out of her day just to help me get pissed at a festival. She was brilliant. Her husband was a pilot and they moved all around the world and settled in NZ and had a few kids. We'll always remember that. Story 44. I was with a group of friends, my dudes and our significant others. We were hanging out at a town in central NJ checking out an old school arcade. Afterwards, we went to a really nice artisanal chocolate shop kitchen across the street, run by an older grandma type. She produced everything herself, like a local baker. One of the ladies in our group looked up disgruntled from a majestic display of chocolate treats and said, "Where's all the white chocolate? I only like white chocolate." As soon as Grandma Choco heard this, a look of unmistakable contempt and disgust twisted her face into something unrecognizable. I would describe it exactly like when Frodo refuses to give the ring back to Bilbo in Rivendell then. Almost spitting the words out whilst gritting her teeth, she says, "White chocolate is flavored. Hand lotion." Lady in our group wordlessly leaves. I laugh so much to this day. This specific memory brings me so much joy every time I think back on it. As a connoisseur of the darkest of dark chocolates, it was like Grandma Choco was channeling my very thoughts at that moment, like our souls had intertwined in the face of abhorrently inferior cultural tastes in chocolate. Anyway, I told a new receptionist at my physical therapy place this morning after she revealed she only likes dark chocolate. She laughed, I laughed, I'm laughing again now. Grandma Choco, I hope you're still there to this day, scolding all of those with inferior tastes. Story 45. When I was around 4, my mother left me at a play area in a mall and there was this one other boy there, blonde-haired. I was a painfully quiet shy kid, but for some reason we clicked and just started playing together and following each other around and being chatty. A while later my mother came to pick me up and I had to say bye to him. I told her all about this new friend I made. Never saw him again. I wonder if he's doing okay.